nodded. He nodded faster. Everyone knows Glenna. We were in his living room. Simon and Becca, those are our children, now near the 10-month mark, under our care. Today she charged into my office and announced, "We're going to do a play," not, "Are you interested in doing a play?" He paused. "We are putting on a play." He pulled Becca onto his lap. "About Arthurdale." "Tell me more." I could picture Glenna, a tiny older woman wound tight with energy, cat-eye glasses. She was a vocal champion of Arthurdale, a community in western Preston County established as part of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal. Arthurdale is celebrating its 50th anniversary in July. They're going to have a reunion, a party, and we're going to do a reader's theater. Phil straightened his posture. Glenna said, "We used to do theater, and we're going to do it again." It was like an order. Phil beamed. "The theater!" His actor's voice made Becca and Simon turn to look at him. There's a pause. "This is the story of Arthurdale." Phil wagged a manuscript in the air as if to tease me. We were headed to a Board of Education meeting, one of its marathon March budget sessions. I climbed into a Scout and took the sheaf of papers. The cardboard cover was stained, the pages wrinkled. Arthurdale, an experiment in community planning. Stephen Hayes' 1975 dissertation had become Phil's latest obsession. He shifted into gear and headed up Salt Lake. "Man, what a place. I can't believe no one knows about it." As he drove us toward Kingwood, the seat springs sang in protest as the Scout bounced through potholes. "I drove around Arthurdale with Glenna this week." He made quick eye contact. "Don't worry, I cleaned the Scout first." Man, it was great. Glenna had shown him the original Arthurdale houses, he said. "The feds built 3 styles. Most of them have been remodeled, but you can still see the original lines." His voice rose. "All 165 are still inhabited. All of them. That's amazing." His Buddha face crinkled with glee. The feds took the poorest of the poor out of shacks and put them in nice houses. Coal miners, farmers, carpenter. This was a rescue like no other rescue. For the 30-minute drive down the mountain, I was Phil's captive audience. He steered through turns one-handed so his free hand could punctuate this sermon. One miracle had him cackling with delight. Eleanor Roosevelt's trip to Scott's Run in 1933 just happened to coincide with the development of a subsistence garden program by the American Friends Service Committee in West Virginia University. Bushrod Grimes, the university extension agent who led the subsistence project, talked to Eleanor, and within a week, he was looking for attractive land for what would become the country's first planned federal community. Bushrod, Phil stabbed an index finger in the air. Bushrod, what a name, what a place. He took his eyes off the road and met mine. And Eleanor, she was amazing. She was really involved. She made sure this happened. He ranted all the way to Kingwood. He turned off the engine. The Scout convulsed. Glenna took me to the old administration building. Phil whistled softly. It's in terrible shape. The roof leaks, the place is falling down. It's filled end to end with junk. Filthy. He clenched the steering wheel, shook it a little. The disregard for historical value is astounding. Bob Teets, he was the editor of the Preston County News at the time, did not share that disregard. Although he came from a long line of Republicans, he admired what FDR had accomplished in Preston County. He promised to print a 4-page tabloid about the July 1984 event. The story of Arthurdale is a story about rescue, about idealism. The Great Depression eviscerated coal mining communities, and Scott's Run, across the Monongahela River from Morgantown, was among the worst of the worst affected. The coal-dusted houses that stair-step deep ravines were ugly in good times. Hard times turned them truly squalid. Coal companies let out-of-work miners live in the shacks just to keep the structures from being dismantled for firewood. Children were starving. Lorena Hickok, an Associated Press writer, toured the area and then wrote this to her friend Eleanor Roosevelt. In a gutter along the main street through the town, there was stagnant, filthy water, which the inhabitants used for drinking, cooking, washing, and everything else imaginable. On either side of the street were ramshackle houses, which most Americans would not have considered fit for pigs. And in those houses, every night, children went to sleep hungry on piles of bug-infested rags spread out on the floor. These were the families that Eleanor would save. She would build a community, Arthurdale, and it would change people's lives. Glenna knew of Phil's work with a local theater group. She knew of his leadership abilities, and she was right. Phil's passion was contagious. The theater group tackled the project, though they had problems with the script Glenna had given them. They added dialogue from Haig's dissertation, from diaries, letters, news stories, government records, and interviews. Arthurdale, Land of Beginning Again, the play they developed, began to take shape. Michael, he's another character in this that you would have met earlier. Michael, too, was caught up in the project. Phil would do words, Michael would do pictures, a slideshow running concurrent with the play. Michael suspected there was a treasure trove of Arthurdale photos. The government had paid talented artists to document America during the Depression. Works Progress Administration photographers had often visited Appalachia. Michael and a part-time resident of the farm named William combed through the West Virginia collection at West Virginia University and culled slides. Hundreds of images. Michael's voice vibrated with excitement during a phone conversation. "You have to see. William and I will put it together." His voice accelerated, raised in pitch. "We'll do a premiere at the farm." In June 1984, springtime at the farm, and this is a farm on Salt Lake that I referenced earlier, was an explosion of green, a palette of chartreuse, olive, and moss. Mud was a counterpoint to the beauty. Boots were de rigueur costume for our celebratory dinner. Soup, homemade bread, last year's jelly from the elderberry bushes below the house. The compact audience, Phil, Francis, Becca, Wilford, Sam, Simon, and I, squeezed together in the small living room. We circled the humming projector and waited for the show. William sat quietly, but Michael, one hand on the Kodak carousel, couldn't disguise his joy. His smile electrified his face, lit him like a preacher. There was a ton of stuff, more photos than I imagined. Great photographers, Louis Hine, Walker Evans, Miriam Post Wolcott, Ben Shahn. The room smelled of damp dog. Mud stuck to our clothes, rimmed our nails, splattered the floor. Michael flipped a switch, and we quieted, even Simon, who had been squirming on my lap. The projector fanned word, and the first slide dropped with a click. Scott's Run, its misery a lamentation in black and white. Shacks, miners, dirty children. The slides fell, and images appeared on a pitted whitish wall not quite big enough to display them. A doorway rippled each image. These were the photos that were in my head in 1974, the year I first considered West Virginia, exactly 10 years before. I realized I'd been in Preston County a decade. We found lots of black families in the early photographs, Michael said, but they wouldn't take blacks in Arthurdale, so we didn't include them. His shoulders sagged. Geez, a sigh. I guess when you're accused of communism, it's okay to be guilty of racism. That's it. That's Arthurdale. Phil's voice was nearly a shout. It's all about contradictions, good and bad. This was a big deal. The federal government's first invented community. FDR's critics were watching, ready to pounce on every mistake. And there were mistakes, lots of them. The first houses were totally inadequate, resort cottages on foundations the wrong size. He raised a hand to smooth non-existent hair, a habit of his, and grinned. And they're all still standing, 50 years later. He laughed, joy crinkling his narrow eyes. Here in Preston County, where fires happen all the time, where coal stoves get too hot, where houses become ash, these houses are still standing. That means something. He leaned back in the one chair in the living room that could bear his big frame. Yes, there's blatant bigotry. No blacks, no immigrants. Again, the hand on top of his head. It's remarkable they were able to create this thing. The feds could never do it again. Michael pushed a button, and we were in Arthurdale. The original Arthur Mansion, a grand Victorian, faced a great empty field. Click. Homesteaders, all men, lined up on the fancy front porch for a portrait. Look, Michael said, they have new work clothes on. Bushrod Grimes arranged for them to get credit at a store in Morgantown. The men hold hats, their faces grim. Michael paused. Man, this is something. These were the lucky ones, but they were ashamed. Two chefs, their white aprons drawing my eye, have crossed arms and scowls. Did I know those faces? Click. Photos of houses under construction. The straight vertical and horizontal lines reveal the skill of a professional photographer. Here's a Hodgson house, Michael said. They were prefab, and when they got through it, they didn't fit the foundations. People freaked out. That wasn't the only problem, Phil interjected. These were Cape Cod vacation homes. They weren't designed for Preston County dinners. They ended up costing thousands more than expected. He laughed, and they were considered luxurious. They had electricity, running water, and refrigerators. Only rich folks in Preston County had indoor plumbing back then. A photo showed a pine paneled living room, a rug, a stool, a chair, a break front, 2 shelves. Eleanor helped with the interior design, Michael said. This is like the best of Arthurdale. The furniture was made by the Mountaineer Craftsman Cooperative there. Every family got beds, chairs, and dressers. They even got cribs if they needed them. Beautiful stuff. His voice rose to reveal his enthusiasm. Those rugs were made in Arthurdale. That pottery. Images appeared and vanished. Every click, every soft whoosh delivered another vision of the very type of society Michael, Phil, and Frances sought for the farm. Artistic, community-minded, agricultural, independent. A photo of the forge drew Michael's cry. They even made the hinges used everywhere. Michael drew a deep breath. This community was designed, he said. Every home had space for some chickens, a cow, a pig. The government even dug root cellars. Amazing. In another photo, one young girl churns butter while another cards wool. Oh my God, the school. He fairly vibrated with the pleasure of his message. It was incredible. Elsie Clapp, who ran the school, was a disciple of John Dewey. They believed in progressive education, learning by doing, linking education to community. They were so far ahead of their time. Another photo showed children building small shacks. The rum little village. William sat cross-legged, his back straight. You know Arthurdale became known as Eleanor's little village. A woman and 2 men smiled at a scale model of the proposed school campus. Elsie wanted the school to be the center of activity in the community, William said. Michael clicked to another photo. This is my favorite, he said, his eyes lifted toward the phantasm on the wall. Eleanor's dress was a vivid floral print as she stepped slightly ahead of her dance partner, both of them facing the camera, both smiling. I recognized the Arthurdale Gymnasium, where I had photographed Girl Scouts and basketball players. She loved to do the Virginia Reel, William said. Click. Eleanor trailed by a parade of media and visitors. Click. Eleanor surrounded by young men and women in caps and gowns. She invited classes to the White House, William said. Click. Again, the Arthurdale Gym. FDR sits in a wheelchair, the braces on his legs visible. The president gave the commencement address to the class of 38, said Michael. This is a rare photo. The press never showed his braces. Eleanor's wearing the same dress as in the dance, Frances said. She always noticed what people were wearing. She was a master of accessories. The next click revealed a square of luminescence. The end. That was great, Frances smiled, sincerity lighting her face. Becca leaned into her mother's chest and closed her eyes. In the doorway, Simon clutched Wilford, handfuls of shirt in each fist. He gently banged his forehead against his father's shoulder, a slow rhythm that warned of an impending tantrum. And now we jump in time again. Blue skies, sunshine, a prize of a summer day. Immense trees shaded houses hastily built a half a century before in an open meadow, formed a regal line next to the decrepit administration building. Across the highway at the Arthurdale School, Glenna Williams, the celebration's champion, and her team put on a glorious party. I photographed homesteaders and their families as they lined up for a formal portrait to be taken by someone else. That picture's in the other, where the craft show is. The sun was too high in the sky for the light to be pleasing, but the photo's narrative made up for its weak aesthetics. The banner across the top of the frame said, "The Arthurdale Dream, Then and Now, celebrating 50 years as a community, July 13th and 15th. Beneath the sign, Elliott Roosevelt, the third son of Franklin and Eleanor, dipped his tall frame to speak to an elderly woman. I had followed Roosevelt most of the day. He was greeted as a hero, with his hands grasped and arms padded, all because a half-century before, his mother had plucked family families from gray, vertical hills and planted them in green, rolling fields. When it was time for the theater performance, light streamed through the open doors of the Arthurdale gym and bounced off the honeyed oak floors. It set the faces of the audience aglow. The doors closed and the room turned sepia. The murmuring crowd sat in a room their families built and listened to words drawn from letters, news stories, government records, and interviews. The slideshow offered ghostly images of proof. On stage, an actress spoke the words of a visitor to Scott's Run. I watched a small boy cradle a pet rabbit in his arms. His sister tugged at my skirt. My little brother doesn't think we're going to cook that rabbit, but we are. The room hushed. In another scene, a homesteader spoke about Arthurdale's first community Christmas tree. She recalled the previous year, a holiday without presents, without hope. The photos whispered as they changed. They said, "This happened." The audience traveled through time. Some recognized their own family stories and images. When an actress declared that her move from Scott's Run to Arthurdale was like leaving a black and white world to enter Technicolor, heads nodded. Phil sat in a wheelchair in a square of light. Dancing molecules of dust hovered in the air like a benediction. He channeled Franklin Delano Roosevelt, sat in the very spot on the very board, and spoke the very words of that wise, generous president. Phil's voice was thick with emotion, its timbre low and melodious. I was moved to tears. There were a lot of tears in Arthurdale that day. Wendell Lunn, who had been in charge of selecting families to settle in Arthurdale, stood in front of a cheering crowd and congratulated his choices and their descendants for proving that compassion, whether on the part of an individual or on the part of government, is a very great thing. U.S. Senator Jennings Randolph, in 1984, the only member of Congress who held office during FDR's famous first 100 days, stood to greet the crowd. I eavesdropped, took notes, and made photographs. "My daddy was the barber," one woman told Senator Randolph. "I believe he cut your hair." "I believe I had more of it then," Randolph joked. The senator was an enthusiastic storyteller. He had often driven to Arthurdale with Eleanor Roosevelt, he said. He recalled one trip across US 50 with Mrs. Roosevelt and Doris Duke. They had stopped to eat at a Romney hotel, and then, he said, with his voice lowered, there I was with the wife of the President of the United States and a rich heiress, and I had 34 cents in my pocket. He said he excused himself from the dining table and made arrangements to send the bill to his Washington office. He remembered Eleanor fondly. Eleanor Roosevelt came to Arthurdale more than 20 times. I asked her if she was registered to vote here. Huh. He had a laugh that used his whole body. The senator called FDR the man that repaired America. His voice full of emotion, Randolph said, "This may be the last time I speak in Arthurdale as a member of the Senate." And that was true. He stepped down, and in November 1984, J. Rockefeller took his seat. Elliott Roosevelt reminded attendees of their history. America was on its knees in 1932, he said. The United States is a capitalist nation, and many capitalists rant and rave about the New Deal. Well, it was the New Deal that preserved the capitalist system for them. Eleanor Seagraves, granddaughter of Franklin and Eleanor, accepted the emotional outpouring, all the thank yous from people who shook her hand and recalled her grandmother. At Saturday's Homesteaders Dinner, she looked at the 150 faces before her and held out a portrait of Eleanor, a gift to the commemorative committee. There have been many changes since my grandmother drove here in an open car, Seagraves said. Today, what First Lady could do that? Then she added, my grandmother wasn't afraid of change. She always said, changes are coming anyway, so it's up to us to be ready. Seagraves smiled. 50 years ago, you sent a message of hope all across the country. On the 50th anniversary of Arthurdale, you sent another message of hope. I photographed Milford Mott, Arthurdale's last federal manager, who had been on duty in April 1947 when the federal subsidies stopped. Mott recalled that when he came to Arthurdale in 1941, the houses needed painting. The government had sent some paint, mostly white, but also a few colors. Homesteaders were on the verge of owning their homes, but they still sought Mott's advice. I told them they could paint their houses checkerboard if they wanted, but they were pretty conservative. He flashed a brief smile. A woman tapped me on the shoulder. "Hi," she said. "Remember me?" I nodded. I had done a story on the post office in Independence where her husband was postmaster, my first summer in Preston County. Now she had another story for me, memories of her childhood in Arthurdale. "We were very fortunate," she told me. "We really got involved with our school and our community." She spoke with pride. "I never would have gotten to meet the president's wife, never gotten to shake her hand if not for Arthurdale." She recalled the beauty of the community. Everything was painted white. It all looked so clean and new. Tears filled her eyes and her voice cracked. "Not very long ago when my mother died, we painted her house white again." Throughout the weekend, as the sun shone hard against the still white school buildings, people carefully scrutinized faces and name tags. Shouts of pleasure filled the air as homesteaders linked with their past. In a gymnasium packed with people, Glenna Williams led an inspired version of Happy Birthday, her index finger jabbed high as she changed the familiar chorus to us. Joyful voices celebrated the anniversary of a radical federal experiment that founded a community. That Saturday, I watched the sun set from the back porch of one of the original homes. Its occupant, one of the original homesteaders, had raised 6 children in Arthurdale. "I can't see how some people can call Arthurdale a failure," she told me. She gazed toward the purple sky, looked across her yard at green fields, lush gardens, good neighbors. It's a wonderful place to live.